The room was dimly lit, the flickering candlelight casting soft, seductive shadows on the walls. Eric's hands moved over my body, slow and deliberate, as though he was memorizing every curve. His breath was warm against my neck, his lips trailing kisses that sent shivers down my spine. My head tilted back and I let the moment consume me. His touch was confident but tender, the kind that left no room for hesitation or doubt. I closed my eyes, surrendering completely, feeling the way our bodies moved together, an unspoken rhythm that only we could understand. His fingers intertwined with mine as he whispered my name, his voice low and intoxicating. In that moment, there was no world outside the four walls of his apartment. Just me, him, and the heat between us that burned brighter with every passing second. Afterward, as we lay tangled in the sheets, my heart still racing, Eric's arm draped over my waist. I looked at him, trying to decipher the mystery in his dark eyes. I wondered what I had gotten myself into, but at the time I didn't care. All I knew was that I wanted more of him, more of this. Eric's hands trailed down my back, his touch igniting a fire that spread through every nerve in my body. He moved with a deliberate slowness, his lips brushing my collarbone, lingering just enough to leave me breathless. I could feel his strength in the way he held me, his arms encircling me as though I were the only thing that mattered. Every kiss, every caress was an unspoken promise, pulling me deeper into him, deeper into the moment that felt endless and all-consuming. The room was filled with the sound of our breathing, heavy and synchronized, as though our bodies had found a rhythm that existed only for us. His fingers slid down my sides, tracing patterns that sent shivers through me. I arced into him, my hands exploring his body, mapping every line and curve as though I needed to memorize him. His name escaped my lips in a whisper, and he responded with a kiss so deep and passionate that it felt like he was claiming me, binding me to him in a way I hadn't thought possible. When we finally collapsed together, spent and tangled in each other's arms, the heat in the room seemed to linger, wrapping us in its embrace. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart as his fingers absently stroked my hair. For a moment, I let myself believe that this was enough, that being with him, losing myself in him, could be all I needed. But somewhere in the back of my mind, the doubt remained. A quiet voice reminded me that the mystery of Eric was a double-edged sword, one that could cut as deeply as it enchanted. It had all started innocently enough. I had been at a street market, idly browsing through vintage books when I felt someone watching me. I turned and saw him, tall, impeccably dressed, and exuding a quiet confidence that immediately drew me in. He introduced himself as Eric, a financier who walked just a few blocks away from my art gallery. His voice was smooth, his smile disarming, and before I knew it, I had agreed to meet him for coffee. Coffee turned into dinner, dinner into late-night conversations, and soon enough, I found myself standing outside his sleek, modern apartment building, my pulse quickening as I waited for him to buzz me in. Eric was unlike anyone I had ever met. Charming but guarded, playful but with an edge of control that intrigued me more than it should have. He introduced me to a world I hadn't known existed. Blindfolded dinners where I had to guess each dish by taste alone. Late night strolls through the city where we'd end up in places that felt as though they belonged only to us. Each moment with him felt like stepping deeper into a dream, one I wasn't sure I wanted to wake up from. The second time we made love was unlike the first. It wasn't rushed or frantic, but slow, deliberate, and almost hypnotic. We were in his apartment again, the rain tapping against the windows as Eric dimmed the lights. He brought out a silk scarf and tied it loosely around my eyes, his voice guiding me as he led me to the bed. "Trust me," he said, his tone soft but commanding, and I nodded, surrendering to him completely. Every touch, every kiss felt heightened in the darkness. My senses sharpened, and I could feel the weight of his body, the heat of his skin against mine. His hands explored me with an intimacy that felt almost overwhelming, each movement deliberate and unhurried. I didn't know where he'd touch me next, and the anticipation was intoxicating. When the blindfold finally came off, his face was the first thing I saw. His expression was unreadable as always, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that made me feel both exhilarated and uneasy. Eric's hand lingered on my cheek, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw as he gazed at me, his dark eyes searching mine. There was an intensity in his look that made my breath catch, a silent conversation I couldn't quite decode. He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine softly at first, then with growing fervor, his fingers tangling in my hair as he deepened the kiss. The world seemed to dissolve around us, leaving only the rhythm of our breaths and the hum of electricity between us. He pulled me against him, his movement slow but purposeful, as if savoring every second. His hand slid down my back, his touch igniting every nerve as he laid me down on the soft sheets. His lips followed, exploring my neck, my shoulders, the curve of my collarbone, leaving a trail of warmth in their wake. I could feel his heartbeat against mine, steady yet insistent, and it only heightened the tension coiling within me. Each touch, each kiss was a declaration, and I found myself giving in to him completely, unable to resist the pull. As our bodies moved together, the world outside ceased to exist. The rain continued to patter softly against the window, but it was a distant sound, secondary to the symphony of sensations between us. His hands held me as though I was something fragile, yet his movements carried the intensity of someone who didn't want to let go. In that moment, it wasn't just passion. It was something raw, something that felt like it had no end. And when it was over, he held me close, his breath warm against my skin, leaving me both fulfilled and wanting more. The weeks passed in a blur of passion and discovery, but beneath it all, there was a growing tension I couldn't ignore. Eric had a way of pulling me into his world and then holding me at arm's length, of giving me just enough to keep me hooked, but never enough to truly understand him. One evening, After a particularly intense argument, I stood in my apartment, staring at the phone, debating whether to call him. Part of me wanted to walk away, to reclaim the control I felt slipping through my fingers. But the other part that craved his touch, his presence, won out. I went back to him, knowing fully well that he was dangerous. Not in the physical sense, but in the way he made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. Eric had become my obsession, and I was powerless to resist him. But as the days turned into night, and the line between love and control blurred, I began to wonder, was this passion worth the cost of losing myself? And could I find the strength to walk away before it was too late?